Wow. Okay, so answers for the warm-up here. It says, did I not give you my screen? Oh, yes, jeez. Look at that, okay. Sorry about that, how embarrassing. It says, what parameters does the constructor of the person class take? Here's the person class's constructor. How do I know it's the constructor? Well, because the class is named person, the constructor must also be named person with no return type. So this is definitely the constructor. The parameter that I see is a string for the name. So the person class takes one string parameter representing a person's name. Then it asks, does the person class have a no argument, aka default, aka parameterless constructor, meaning a constructor without parameters? No, it doesn't. It only has one constructor that has a parameter. And then it said, list a few characteristics of a constructor, which it looked like just a few of us just didn't get to this part of the question for whatever reason. Maybe it was too tough. It says constructors have the same name as the class. Yes, that must be true. They have no return type. There's no void, string, int, double, whatever there. They initialize all instance variables. There's a name. We've initialized the name. I don't know if I agree with all of them. There might be some constructors you write where you don't initialize necessarily all instance variables, but most of the time you do. And also they provide any code needed to set the object up for use. In this case, it's just making a person have a name. Questions there? All right. Good to review constructors. We have to kind of go back to CS1 in our head a little bit about constructors here. It says, as evidenced by the video, an employee is a person. Write a class header using the keyword extends. So public class employee extends person. I know their example up here didn't have public. When we're dealing with CS Awesome, you might not see the word public in the class headers sometimes, and that's mainly because of those active code windows where they have several classes in the same spot. You can only make one of them public, but here we don't have that restriction. So public class employee extends person. This means an employee is a person. Number 3 says, since every employee is a person, name one instance variable that employee inherits. An employee inherits its name. All employees have a name because all employees are people. Now, while you do inherit the name, you don't have direct access to it because it's private. The string name is private in person, which means we do have a name, just like yesterday, books and movies had a title and a genre, but we don't actually have direct access to them. We're going to be looking at that and the complications that arise from that a little bit today. Number 4 says, in addition to inheriting all characteristics of the person, class, and employee has an ID number. I made my ID number an integer here. And then it says, after watching the video above, can you think of any additional data? So you could have a rating. I'm thinking that rating of the young man in the video, his manager said he was super, was the word I heard. You might have years of service. Heck, you might have a Boolean can speak sign language. Did you really? Nice. Any other instance? Jaden? Can't sign. Nice. Brandon, what do you have?
I did array of strings for languages.
Oh, very cool. So they might be multilingual. Very cool. Max? Oh boy. Okay. Wow. Now, is dying and being fired, are those mutually exclusive events, or are they independent, or are they co... Okay, gotcha. Very cool. So how long it can be held underwater? Anybody else want to add theirs? Okay. All right. If you ever have a job interview and the boss in the job interview asks you how long can you be held underwater, maybe apply elsewhere. Oh, if you're a lifeguard. And then that's when you ask, okay, I can hold my breath, but why are you asking how long I can be held underwater? And they say yes. All right. Today we are going to be looking at the private instance variables from the superclass, from the parent class. And how can we actually set those? For example, how do I give an employee a name when I don't have direct access to it? If you're looking at the example here with the person and the employee, I would not be allowed to do something like this in my employee constructor. I could not do something like, what was it? The name or just name? Name equals John Doe. Why would I not be allowed to do that in employee? Name is private in the superclass. I don't have direct access to it. That's what we're going to be looking at today. If you could go to the Google Classroom if you're not already there. I thought maybe we could take notes together today. It seems to go better when we take notes together. I do have some fresh sheets coming around if you'd like one. If you've been taking notes in your notebook, you can continue to do that. But there is a freshetta. There is a fresh sheet of notes coming around. And I am going to navigate to the Google Classroom, if I can. And I'm going to be navigating to 9.2, Inheritance and Constructors. And I would like you to do the same, of course. Of course. Because if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. We're going to go together today. Facts. All right, while those note sheets are coming around, it might be good just to review with you folks what a constructor actually does. So, I know many of you understand it, but some of you maybe it's been a while since you've used a constructor, looked at a constructor, or anything like that. So, thank you, Jenny. So I'm going to go ahead and just maybe write an example of a constructor in action on my notes here, just for a good review. Topic. I'm going to say the topic here is Inheritance and Constructors. If you want the section that's on the AP classroom, or the AP CS Awesome, I believe it's 9.2. And today is February 6, 2020. So just as a review for what a constructor is, I believe it was on that warm-up that you just did. But a constructor, just remember, a constructor is like an object factory. It sets values for the instance variables at the time of creation, or instantiation, I guess would be the appropriate word there. And it is the method that is called when you say new. So as an example, if you do person P equals new, person, that is a call to the person constructor, and I believe our person constructor had a name. Anybody catch the guy's name from the Taco Bell video? King Burger. Person P equals new person, King Burger. So this would make, they would go to the constructor in person. The constructor in person is up there to go ahead and set the name to something, because that's the only instance variable. In this case, I've made the name King Burger. So just a quick rushing forth of constructors and what they do, just a quick reminder for everybody. There's a few more rules about constructors. They must always be public, and they always have the same name as the name of the class. So if the name of the class is person, your constructor's name is person. They also don't have a return type. You just say public person. Okay. That was my quick review of constructors. Any questions about constructors before we move along? Yeah, Bucky. Bless you.
So, my guess is that like when you call like an array and stuff like that, I'm guessing like Java has a method, constructor, program based to make arrays.
You are exactly right, because arrays are objects themselves, and when you make an array, you usually say like new string and give it some, or new int and give it some indices for rows and columns. You're absolutely right, Bucky. Correctamundo. I've never seen it, but it does exist. Okay.
IT array constructor.
You're the man. All right, here we go. It says subclass. I'm reading from the website here. Subclasses inherit all the private instance variables in a superclass that they extend, but they cannot directly access them since they are private, and constructors are not inherited. I think that is a ton of interesting information, and I am going to write that stuff down because I think it's important. So, first of all, let's say instance variables. Let's do, I don't need to do, okay. Instance variables are inherited. And let's see here. Instance variables are inherited, but are inaccessible in the subclass. When I say inaccessible, what I'm saying is you can't change them and you can't really see their value. Why? Because they're private. So maybe I'll say because they are private. So, just like yesterday, if you were writing the book class or the, what was the other one? The movie class. What was it? Book and movie? Yeah. Books had a title. They had a genre because they were items for sale. A book is a item for sale. An item for sale had a title and a genre. However, even though a book has that information, I was not able to change the title or change the genre inside of the book class because those were private in the super class there. So that's one interesting thing. The other interesting thing I saw, whoops, wrong color. The other interesting thing I saw was that constructors are not inherited. Can't they just change the rules? Yeah, Bucky.
So if you name the person King Burger,
Yeah.
but then you go down, you can't call and get that information from the class that extends to the person class?
Not yet, but at the end of the day today, you will be able to.
Oh.
So we're going to find out, because right now, here's what everybody's thinking in the room. Right now you're thinking, okay, well, how do I give an employee a name then?
Oh, employee.
We're going to get there.
I have
Give
to-
me a second. Just let it simmer here. Let it simmer for a second. We're going to get there, I promise. So, just like Bucky's question, where everybody's thinking, how do you initialize inherited private variables if you don't have direct access to them? How do I give an employee a name? Well, in Java, you can put a call to the parent constructor, in other words, the superclass's constructor, as the first line in a subclass constructor. In Java, the superclass constructor can be called from the first line of a subclass constructor by using the keyword super. Just like that employee at Taco Bell was super, we're going to use the keyword super and passing appropriate parameters. For example, super or super the name. I don't know what came first, Java or that guy that signed at Taco Bell. I'm not sure. Okay, so the actual parameters given to super are used to initialize the Okay, so there's a lot of stuff going on here. I want to write it down. Here's how I'm going to say this. Let's make a little header here that says something like to call the superclass's constructor. Grammar people, is this okay? Okay. Thank you. We had a grammar debate in one of the other hours over the apostrophe S. I think it's okay if it's singular. Okay. Whew, close call. Okay. I almost took it down to the writing center during lunch. I'm glad. All right. To call the superclass constructor, a couple things. First, it must be the first line of the subclass's constructor. There it is again. There we go. Must be the first line of the subclass constructor. Here's how I think about it. Before you can be an employee, you have to be a person. So you must first create a person before you can be an employee. You must first be an animal before you can be a mammal, before you can be a human. So you always have to call the superclasses constructor in the very first line of the subclasses constructor first before you can start specifying their ID number and extra specializations and add-ons. So in the example they give here, this says go ahead and make an employee. This is the employee constructor, but the very first line says super, which is going to create a person first. And then they've got kind of a similar thing going on for this employee over here. Why do you have to do this? Because instead of doing super, if I tried to be a dinghy and try to do something like name equals the name, is that going to be legal? No, why? Name is private. So the only way I can access it really is by passing it to the superclasses constructor and going, hey, can you name this person this before I go ahead and set the ID and all that stuff? So this is actually illegal here because name is private in the superclass. So I have to always say super first. So it must be the first line of the subclass's constructor. Additionally, we use the keyword super. You don't say person. You always use the keyword super. Now, if I put super in like that, what type of constructor is it going to try to call from the superclass? The default one, the parameterless one. Or, if there's a special constructor that takes in parameters to set stuff, you could also do something like super and then any necessary parameters. So the example they had was like super the name or something, right? Something like that. Jason, do you have a question or you're just stretching? Okay. Yeah.
Wait, so the instance variable is going for the parameters, right, when you call it? So if you did like super, would that mean there would be no instance variables, or it would take every instance?
Well, what if I did super with no parentheses, what it would try to do is it would try to call a constructor for the person class that has no parameters. So, for example, the person class we had that we were given in the warm-up, there was one constructor that took a single string parameter. So doing super the name would be legal. If I try to do super with no parameters, there's no constructors here that are default that take no parameters. So in that case, I couldn't just do super all on its own. Does that answer your question? Yeah.
One name has to be like what the user is, would it have to be by name?
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah, Jason.
Why is there two classes?
Why are there? Say it one more time.
Are there two classes?
Oh, in their example? Yeah, like what? CS Awesome or like? I gotta be careful what I'm saying, being recorded. Yeah, these are constructors. I don't know why this says class here. It should just say public employee. Jason, you're right. Why is it there? Because somebody made a big oof. That's all I can assume. It should just say public employee because they're constructors. I don't know why. Yes, but moving along, constructors are inherited. Where were we? Java. Okay, must be the first line. The actual parameters given to super are used to initialize the inherited instance variables. That was the last thing I wanted to write down there.
Even if you wanted to add on like another variable that is some class, you just do it after that.
Exactly right. Exactly right. Let's do that in 1 second. So super is used to call the superclass's constructor and set values for the inherited instance variables. I should do that in red. That's not going to help. Okay, inherited. It's like 3D vision. Instance variables. So there's no way for me to change the name inside of employee because it's private inside a person. So what I'm going to say is, hey, I can't touch it here in employee, but I'm going to give it to you in person, and you do your job upstairs, and then you give me back a person, then I'm going to augment stuff. So Trevor was saying, well, okay, what about the ID number that an employee has? Well, you would do super first to set their name, and then after that you could go ahead and do the specialization. You could do ID equals the ID or something. Bucky.
So, I just have like a quick question.
Yeah.
Let's say you were like 3 classes, so you had like employee is person is animal.
Sure.
If you want to like call a constructor from animal, would you do like super, and then do the parameter?
I think it would be really cool if Java had a super duper keyword where you could go up like I know what you're saying, so you could go up 2 levels. You can't though, but here's what you can do. If you're 3 levels deep in a hierarchy, the lowest level can call the super class's constructor 1 level up, like a employee would call a person's constructor, and then person's constructor could call super, which would call animal's constructor.
Yeah, so that's why I was thinking like super, but then you like inside the parentheses you put another super with that.
I wish, but what's really going to happen is since you can only extend 1 class, when you say super, you're just going to talk about the class above, but then the class above might have a constructor that refers to its parent class.
Oh.
And so, it's like chaining them together.
So then you just put a constructor in right away.
Yeah. Trevor, did you want to add something, or is that? I'm so sorry.
It's crappy, but
I got like snow day brain going on right now. I don't know about you guys.
it's
Okay.
crappy, but it makes sense.
It's crappy, but it makes sense.
We did it in my method.
That's,
We did it more advanced before.
That's like, I wish that was my teaching style. Yes, Trevor, you got it.
You have a much better for when you're
Shh. Yeah.
When you're the instance variables, you have to put them in a certain order, or
You can put them in whatever order you want to. All right. So down below here it says the name, and the employee constructor will call the constructor that takes a string object in the person class to set the name. Whew! It's a little complicated, but let's look here. We got a person class. A person has a name. The person constructor takes in a string that represents the name, and we say make the instance variable equal to that. Quick question from yesterday. Is this necessary right here? No, because only the instance variable is named name, the parameters named the name. There's no confusion. Is it wrong? No. Java's going to actually implicitly do that, but anyway, just keep moving here. Accessor, mutator. Now here's what's very interesting. You'll notice that the accessor for the name is inside a person. The mutator that changes the name is inside a person as well. You might have to go back in your memory banks to CS1 to think about what accessors and mutators are. Accessors allow you to see the value of a instance variable. Mutators allow you to change the value of an instance variable. So inside a person, I have access to the name. So it's okay for me to write accessors and mutators. However, down in employee, we've got some very interesting stuff going on. First of all, a good review question. Look at employees line 29. There's a static variable. What does it mean for a variable to be static? It belongs to the class. It belongs to all the objects, and it belongs to everything at the class level. So the next ID there belongs to every member of the class. It's basically from the class. It starts at 1. You'll notice when an employee is created, we call the superclass's constructor. What is the superclass in this case? Person. So we're going to call, this is going to call person's constructor all the way up here, and it's going to pass in whatever value they said for the name. Okay. Whatever value they said for the name and change the name. Then it comes back down to employee's constructor, and it makes the ID equal to whatever next ID currently is, and then what does it do for next ID? It increments it. So the first employee I make, what's their ID number?
1.
Well, I think it starts at 1, and then the next ID is going to be 2, 3, 4. It's very interesting design, I think, at least. And you'll notice an accessor for the ID is inside of employee. It has to be here. It can't be inside of person. Why? Because person doesn't have an ID. Inheritance doesn't work in two directions. Can you imagine if your parents inherited your traits? That would be, you go home and your dad would be like, bruh, something like that. I don't know how this relationship would work. Or something, whatever the kids are doing these days. Whatever the kids are doing these days.
I get their traits.
Oh, you get their traits, you get dad humor.
You would get their traits back because you're just there.
And it's just this like echo chamber where you're just knocking dad jokes off of each other. Okay. No, it's not how it works. So only the accessor for ID can be inside of employee. It can't be inside a student because you don't pass traits back and forth in inheritance. They only get passed down. Now, when I make new employee Danny, what constructor is called on line 46? Let's start there. Whose constructor is called on line 46? Employee. Then you go up to employee's constructor. Employee takes Danny, that was the string that was passed in, and it sends Danny all the way up to the superclass's constructor for person. And so it's going to make the name equal to Danny. Then it comes back down to the subclass's constructor and does the rest of the stuff. It's going to give Danny an ID number of 1, and it's going to increment Danny's ID number. And if you go ahead and run it, you can see that, Danny has an ID number of 1, and that's the name. Now, line 47, the type of emp is employee. How can I do .get name when it's an employee and not a person? How do you think I have that get name method? If you go ahead, you can look at the employee class. There's no get name method in employee. I inherit it. Are you starting to see? I'm inheriting it from the superclass. Because it's a method in the superclass, I get it. I can also get the ID number, well, just because it's an employee. Technically, I could change Danny's name too. I could do imp dot, I think there was a set name method. Instead of Danny, they could be inad, backwards Danny. Or they could, what's everybody's favorite name? Absidy. Is the E actually part of the name or is the E silent? Okay. I can call the set name method because I inherit it from the person class. Yes, Max?
Is the parameter name like the local variable of the employee constructor to match the local variable name of the person constructor?
Say it one more time.
Like the name of the employee that matches the name of the person or temp.
No, you could. This could be N here, and it could be the name up here. The name of the parameters doesn't really. As long as it's a string, that's what's important. Is it's a single string. Great question. Wow, beautiful questions, everybody. Okay, so I can call all those methods because I inherit them. Essentially, what we're looking at here is when we create an object of the subclass, we have to first make an object of the superclass, and then we can specialize and add on the ID numbers and all that stuff. Okay. Let's keep chugging along here. Some more important, don't worry, we will have a 2-minute break very soon, I promise. We've got this in a question. It says, if a class has no constructor in Java, the compiler will add a no argument. If you see the word no argument, it's the same as default. The compiler will add a default constructor. A default constructor is one that doesn't have any parameters. This is a very interesting result. Did you know that Java would automatically create a constructor for you? I didn't. Well, I did 3rd hour and 4th hour, but it's a very interesting result. But actually, you guys knew it from yesterday. If you go back to the store code, look at lines 28, 29, and 30 from yesterday. Did we ever write a constructor for movie? Did we ever write a constructor for book? No. I can scroll up and show you. There's no constructor inside a book. There's no constructor inside a movie. So how was I able to? Well, Java basically said, okay, you're pathetic. You can't write your own constructor. I'm going to write a constructor for you. But since it's going to be one of those default parameterless constructors, what do you think it's going to set all ints to? Well, hold on. Ints, 0 doubles, booleans, strings and other objects, null. So if you remember from yesterday, after we went ahead and we created a store, a book, a movie, I'll just show you really quick. The book, title null, genre null, author null, publisher null. The movie, title null, genre null, rating null. It's because it just made that default constructor, which essentially gave everything the starting default value that was nothing. So, kind of an interesting result. I'm going to go ahead and write it down on my note sheet, as I would recommend that you do too. Essentially, if you don't make a constructor, Java will make a, insert whatever word you want here, default, parameterless, no argument, etc., default constructor for you. Now, it's not going to be nice. It's not going to do much for you. It's just going to set your instance variables to zeros or null or false or something. But it will do that for you. It won't actually show it to you. It won't be in your code. It'll just kind of happen behind the scenes. Yeah, you could yeah, it'll automatically initialize it anyway. True. It says if a subclass has no call to a superclass constructor using super as the first line, then the compiler will automatically add a super call. Now that's very interesting. So up here, let's say I was a dingus and I forgot to call super first. Java will automatically call super for me, but it's going to call super very specifically. It will automatically add super with no parameters as the first line in the constructor. So be sure to provide a default constructor in parent classes, or be sure to use an explicit call to super. So an interesting result that I would like you to write down as well: if no call to super in first line of constructor, first line of subclass constructor, Java will implicitly make the first line, or call, maybe I should just say call. Where did it all go? I hit Control Z and my whole life vanished. Wait, how do I, wait, redo. Oh my gosh. I just had that sinking feeling when you wake up and you don't see the call from 429-8030, the Saline High School phone number. Okay. Oh my gosh. That was so close. Did anybody else wake up in the middle of the night looking for that phone call?
Yep.
Same. I woke up 4 times. Java. If I'm here, baby. Okay. Java will implicitly call super.
You know it's gonna snow over this night, right?
It's gonna snow, and we will see you tomorrow.
Not if it starts snowing at like 1 a.m. Maybe 3 a.m. 3 a.m.
So you're saying there's a chance?
Mr. Foster, last night at like 9.
It was 99%. Don't worry, I looked.
No, but like they have like 7 hours to pull it up. If it starts snowing like
Oh, we need it a little bit
3
later.
a.m., we'll be fine. Because
It's about
the
the
roads were
timing.
complete crap for like
But
3
if
hours.
it didn't
after
happen
that.
today, then it didn't happen tomorrow.
All right. So okay. Yes, I know. We didn't have a snow day. We're here, baby. Okay. So That's very important. If you don't put super because you forgot to, Java is going to try to help you and call super for you, but it's only going to call super with no parameters, which means either your super class better have a default constructor or your code's not going to compile. So let's look at this question here and then we'll take our break, promise. It says, given the class definitions endpoint and namepoint below, which of the constructors that follow would be valid? Let's look at endpoint for a second. It's got integers, my x and my y. What kind of constructor is this? Parameter list, default, no argument, whatever word you want to use for it. This one has parameters, which set my x and my y to some integer and takes in 2 ints. Then it says there's a name point that extends endpoint. That means a couple things. Name point is an endpoint. We see that name point has a name. What other instance variables does name point have? My x and my y. Why? Because they're inherited. So it's asking us which one of these constructors are legal. Let's look at number 1. I don't see super. So what's Java going to do? It's going to implicitly add super for me. If Java doesn't see super in the first line, it's going to go, okay, well, this person doesn't know what they're doing. I'm going to try to help. And it'll implicitly put it in there for you. It won't actually write it in, but it'll just kind of call it behind the scenes. Now, is this legal? Basically, does the superclass have a default constructor? Yes, it does. So this is okay. And then my name belongs in name point, so that's okay. 1 is okay. Do we have questions on why 1 is okay? Yes, Mason?
But would you need a super thing because it relates back to name point, which extends endpoint, but is it name point its own thing, so it wouldn't have to go to super in order to do it?
If you set up an inheritance relationship using extends, you have to first create the superclass object before you can create the subclass object. So a name point must first be an endpoint before it's a name point. In other words, you must call super first. I know it's like its own thing, but it's not. Just like you're a mammal. You have to be a mammal before you can be a human. Yeah. They didn't need to write what? Oh, they didn't really have to, but it's just asking, is it legal, I think is the question. Exactly. Oh yeah, you're saying, well, this would set it to a valid string though instead of null. Oh. Oh, yeah, you're right. They probably didn't need this default constructor because it would go ahead and, yeah, I see what you're saying now. Good point. But actually, I guess then calling super with no parameters would make it illegal then. It would make 1 illegal if they didn't have it. Because Java will Java will only add a default constructor for you if you don't have any other constructors. So since we had this other one, if I didn't provide the default constructor, it would not have a default. So good question. Thank you. 2. What do we think about 2? No, why? Yeah, you can. So it doesn't have super, and you can't access my x and my y because they're private in the super class. So 2 is no good. This, guys, I am going to see you folks do this one a lot. You cannot set the instance variables of the superclass from the subclass unless you call super. So this is wrong. I'm going to see many people do this over the next couple weeks, I should say. So don't. Go ahead and set the instance variables for the superclass by using super. What do we think about 3? It tries to call a get out of here. It tries to call a superclass constructor that takes in 2 integers because D1 and D2 are ints. Is there a superclass constructor that takes in 2 integers? Yes. And then it goes ahead and sets my name equal to name. So 3 is okay. The answer would be 1 and 3. One quick comment before our break. If these 2 were switched, even though individually they are legal lines of code, it would not work. Why? Super has to be in the first line. You guys are smart. Let's go take a quick break. 2-minute break here. We'll be back at 2:27. We got a little bit of coding to do. What's going on, Noah? So there's this rectangle class, and we all agree a rectangle has a length and a width. They've got a rectangle constructor that by default sets the length and width to 1. They've got a parameterized constructor that sets the length and width equal to some parameters. But here's the cool thing. This draw method will make a box of asterisks that has the same length and width as your rectangle. Check it out. You can run it right now, and it makes a 3x5 rectangle out of asterisks. Pretty neat, right? Yeah. Okay. What you're going to do is a couple things here. It says you will write a new class called square that inherits from rectangle. Is a square a rectangle? Yes. A square is a rectangle where the length and width are equal. Square will inherit length, width, and the draw method because it's public. You will write square constructors that will call the rectangle constructors. Now, the other hours, we had a little bit of time for people to do it independently. I'd love to do it independently, but I'm a little bit worried about the time constraints. Would it be okay if we did it together? Okay. So, how do you guys want to do it? Some people don't like the code editor. Would you rather do it in JGrasp? I do have a paste bin for it.
It's fine.
Can we do it in Microsoft Paint, please? All right, quick vote. Code editor window right here. Raise your hand. All right, hands down. JGrasp. Code editor window it is. Okay. So, I got to zoom out a little bit, though, so here we go. It says, number 1, make the class square below inherit from rectangle. Well, here's class square. How do I set it up so it inherits from rectangle? Extends rectangle. Step 1 is done. Step 2 says add a square, no argument constructor. Again, the other word, I don't know why, default constructor is the same thing. All right. I know it doesn't tab overwrite. This was your choice you did to yourselves. Okay. To write a constructor. Constructors are always public or private? Public. What's the return type for a constructor? Nothing. What's the name of the constructor? Square. Always the same as the name of the class. Very good. Now it says default constructor, which to me means parameterless. Very good. And of course I'm going to do left brace, enter, enter, right brace. I could be in the code editor window. I could be in JGrasp. I could be in Notepad. You know I'm going to do left brace, enter, enter, right brace. Now, we are in the subclass. Square is a subclass of the superclass rectangle. The very first thing I have to do in my subclass's constructor is what? Super. Since this is the default constructor for square, I think my call to the superclass's constructor should also be a default constructor. So first, does rectangle have a default constructor? Yes. Now, I can't just say rectangle here. What do I put instead? Super. Just like that young man working at Taco Bell. You know what's so interesting to me? Like, I think I speak English, like, pretty well. I think I might, like, and the people that wait on me at Taco Bell speak English usually, like, pretty well. They never get my order right. But this person that was signing, they got their order right. I just can't go there and get my order right. It's always like sour creams all over the place, or they're putting stuff on there that I don't want. It's just messed up. And if they give me a quesadilla without the quesadilla sauce, it's game over. I know, it's game over. All right, moving along here. By the way, Taco Bell, not a sponsor. Add a square constructor with one argument, aka one parameter. So public square. It says one argument for a side or one parameter for a side. What do you think the type should be for the side length? Int, okay. And I'll just call it side. Now, here's the tricky thing. We know that we got to call super first. So, okay, no duh. You'll notice, first of all, square doesn't have any extra instance variables. Why? Because a square really only has a length and a width, and we already have a length and width in square that we've inherited from rectangle. Now, thinking about which constructor I want to call, if I look up at rectangle, I already called the default constructor from square's default constructor. What is a square? It is a rectangle where the length and the width are the same. If I look at rectangle's constructor on line 12, for me at least, it's looking for a length and a width. What would be the length of a square? Side length. What would be the width of a square? Side length. So what I'm going to do is call this constructor that looks for two integers, but guess what I'm going to pass in for both the length and the width? Side. I'm going to say, guess what? The length is side, the width is side. Because if you remember, the rectangle constructor, the first parameter it was looking for was the length. The second parameter it was looking for was the width. I'm essentially making the length and the width the same value, which AKA is a square. All right, that was 3. Step 4 says uncomment these to test. Now, I don't think you can highlight them and right-click on them to uncomment them, so I'm just going to go... Line 48 creates a square object named S1. What is it going to set the length and the width to? 1, 1. How do we know? Well, let's see. It's calling square's default constructor. Let's look at square's default constructor. Square's default constructor calls rectangle's default constructor, and rectangle's default constructor sets the length and the width to 1 and 1. And you can see, oh, maybe I didn't run it yet. Maybe I should run it. Now I can see, here's my 1 by 1 square. Isn't it cute? Then I uncommented another line of code that said, make a new square that has a side of 3. This is going to call square's constructor that expects a single integer. If I scroll up, here's square's constructor that expects a single integer. It takes that integer 3 and sends it to the superclass's constructor as super 3, 3. I go up to rectangle's constructor. It sends in 3 for length, 3 for width, and it makes the length and width 3. So that's why I see my 3 by 3 square down here. Very cool, very cool. Questions so far? Here's the main idea from the lesson. Can you do this and can you understand this? That's the main idea from the lesson. Can you write a constructor for a subclass using super to call the superclass's constructor? Yes, Josh. Like right, like here? I think in this one, Josh, you know what? Let's see. In a general sense, I don't know the exact reason why, but the way I think of it is just, like I was saying earlier, you have to be a person before you can be an employee. You have to be an animal before you can be a mammal. You have to be a mammal before you can be a person. I think the idea is you're making the base class object first, and then you can add some specialization to it or afterwards. Does that kind of make sense? I don't know the actual technical reason, though. That's just how I think of it in my head. But Josh, I don't think this is what you asked, but what if I didn't do that there? What's Java going to automatically do on line 36 anyways? It's going to call the parameterless constructor anyways. So I think even though it's not what you asked, Josh, I think technically I don't even need that line because it'll know if I don't have super to call super. The last one, let's just do number 5 together. It says add an area method to rectangle that computes the area of the rectangle. So I have to do the area method inside of rectangle. Why? Because I don't have access to the length and width inside of square. So I'm going to do it just on this last line before this brace here. Let's see. Public, if I'm finding the area and the length and width are ints, what should be the return type here? Probably int will be okay because length times width will be an int as well. I'm going to call it area. And then we know the way that you calculate area is return length times width. Now, I have to write it in rectangle. Why? Well, I don't have access to the length and width down in square. Does that make sense? Length and width are private inside of rectangle, so I can only use them inside of rectangle unless I had accessors and I inherited them, but I don't. So let's see if it works for a rectangle object. Sorry, there's that method. You guys don't need to see it for too long. Let's see if it works for a rectangle. If I did something like print out r.area. Well, r has a length of 3 and a width of 5. It should print out 15, God willing. It does print out 15. Now, what do you folks think? Is it going to work for a square? We agree that square doesn't have the area method in it. Rectangle does. But that's not what I'm asking. Is it going to work? Yes, it is going to work. Why? Where does square get the area method from? It inherits it. Square inherits the area method from rectangle. So I can use area for a square because it's inherited from the rectangle class. All right. The main idea today, first of all, instance variables in the superclass are private. So what the heck can we do with them in the subclass? I need to give an employee a name, something like that. Well, since it's private in the superclass, I can't just set them in the constructor. What I do instead is I use that keyword super, and it must go in the first line of my constructor in my subclass. If I do that, then I'm in good shape. And that's going to allow me to initialize any values for my superclass. What's coming around is your homework. Oh, and don't even hit me with homework. We haven't had homework in 3 days. I know what you're thinking, Mr. Foster, I'm not even supposed to be here today. Well, I had to be here. You need to be here. Snow day tomorrow. What you're doing is writing a bunch of constructors. You're writing a bunch of constructors. One quick thing about this assignment, wherever you see the word argument, you can just replace it in your head with parameter if you want to. If you see no argument, that just means no parameters, or parameterless, or default, or whatever you want to say. But you're just writing a bunch of constructors. I am going to be checking this tomorrow for completion. Do a good job. Don't bring me a dog dinner for me to look at on your worksheet. Do a very good job on it. I will post the video if you struggled on anything today. You could always slow it down, rewind, fast forward, whatever. I've already posted a link of what we went over today. I will post my notes as well. And if you're still struggling after all those resources, just Google Java, Inheritance, Constructors, Super, and I bet you'll get 9 million resources to help you. No, the exit ticket is not due. I think we might start tomorrow with it, but you don't have to do it. We'll just go over the answers. I was thinking I was going to have enough time. I didn't.